All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I see some people are still entering. This meeting is being recorded, so if anyone misses the beginning, they can go back and see that in a little bit. But hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Friends of Different Learners February meeting. My name is Stacy Macris, and I'm one of the co-presidents of the Friends group for the school year, along with Carrie Chappie, who's also on this call. For anyone that is new to Friends, we're glad you're here. We are an independent organization made up of parents, staff, community members, and teachers dedicated to maximizing the potential of Birmingham Public Schools students with different abilities. This does not mean your child needs to have an IEP or 504 plan to be one of our members. Many of our members do not. Our Friends events throughout the year will target specific topics. All events are free, and we hold some virtually and some in person this year. When in person, they're at Covington in the Media Center, and when virtual, they are on Zoom, of course. That information on whether it's going to be virtual or in person will always be in the advertising, which gets sent out through the schools and then is also on our website as well as our Facebook page. So let me go to the next slide here. So our website is friendsofdifferentlearners.com. You can find us on Facebook at Friends of Different Learners. We would love to have you join Friends. Membership information can be found on our website. A $10 annual membership fee is collected, which primarily goes towards grants we provide the schools. So please join us and support us. Oh, wait, 1 second. I have one more slide here with our schedule of our upcoming events. So our meetings are typically the first Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Our next meeting is March 3rd, which is the overview of services by Michigan Alliances for Families, and they provide a ton of wonderful free services to the community. So that will be a good one as well. In order for this virtual format to be successful, we have typically found it works best if everyone will remain on mute while the presentation occurs. After this, we will open up to questions and answers, and people can either unmute themselves or ask questions through the chat. We will need to be cognizant of time. If there are more questions at the conclusion of our time, we will invite you to contact our speaker directly. And I know Brenda has already built in a few touch points for us to connect to her throughout the meeting by using the chat function as well. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Brenda Mann tonight. Brenda Mann was a teacher for 10 years in public schools, has a master's degree in early childhood from Wayne State University, an undergraduate degree from Michigan State University. Her business, Academic and Behavior Consultants, offers academic coaching, school advocacy, and parent educator training on brain-based disorders. She has 2 kids with ADHD and other brain-based disorders who were diagnosed early. She took a leave from work to focus on their early intervention, then went back to work in both private and public schools and witnessed kids who were failing. Brenda, thank you for being with us tonight. I'm going to turn this over to you. So I'm going to stop sharing.
All right. So I'm going to share back, huh?
Yes.
Is that what I'm doing? Okay. People, just be patient with me. I do Zooms all day long with my families and kids, and now I'm nervous that it's not going to go right. So thank you for that introduction. I'm so thrilled to be here, you guys. When I first started this business and I heard about Friends of Different Learners, I was like, why wasn't this here when my boys were young? I mean, I had to do my own research. I always say I kind of have the Brenda Mann doctorate of how to parent neurodiverse kids because nobody was really helping me with my kids. And homework was probably the biggest battle. So I'm going to get right into it and let you know that, there's several things that I do, and I'm going to try to stick to the topic of what's here. And if you have questions afterwards, I've even timed it out, time management, which is part of executive function. I've timed it out so we can at least have 10 to 15 minutes for questions. But there are going to be times that I'm going to ask you while I'm talking about something, especially the executive functions. I want you to think about how does that relate to my child? And maybe just type it in the chat, because I'm definitely not mentioning everything in these slides. I already have way too much information. These slides actually, I could do a 45 minutes, a half hour, 45 minutes on each one of these slides, and probably 3 hours on the ones that parents could do. But we're going to go quickly so you can have some question time. So here we go. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover today. What it takes to do homework. It takes focus and it takes executive function. The parts of executive function, if you're new to this term, are adaptable thinking, planning, self-monitoring, working memory, time management, organization. Now, the questions we're going to talk about today that a lot of people wonder is, well, what can the teacher do about this? And what should the teachers be doing if they have a 504 or an IEP, and even RTI? And if you don't know those three terms, we will talk about them. And the other big question is what you should. Do you see how it's capitalized should? You should be doing all these things. You're getting all the freebies tonight. Any family who calls me as an advocate or just to train the parents, this is much of what I give them. So we're going to start with what it takes to be successful with homework. And again, this little circle for focus, this could be even more, but let's face it. In order to do your homework, first you have to know, I was going to put on a really cute cursor, by the way. Remind me to tell you about my little boy that I had today and his executive function if I forget. But he was going to help me make a cute cursor for you guys. I go, no way. What if it's too big? What if I can't read the print? So we had a whole thing about cursors today because it gets in the way and it gets him off focus. So by the way, don't let your kids get those special cursors. It makes it much more difficult when they're using their computer. So what was learned in class? If they didn't focus on that, they can't do the homework. What was the homework? What were the directions? When is it due? And completing it, staying focused. That's a lot. If a child has ADHD with executive function issues, you hear what I'm saying? Not all kids with ADHD have executive function issues. Or you could have executive function weakness. That is not a diagnosis, but it's something that can be worked on and needs to be worked on. So I put together a steps of things, and I saw this article years ago and I can't find it. It was like 14 steps to effectively turn in homework, and I didn't get to the 14. So if I'm missing anything, please put it in the chat. So first you have to write down your homework, although these kids today think they don't have to because it's posted online. You will learn later that I do not just accept memorizing what they heard in class or looking online for what the teacher wrote. I do not accept that work with any of the kids that I do my academic coaching with. They have to use a planner. First, they have to put the homework in a proper folder. Well, you know how that goes with the ADHD kids who are really messy. Their folder is squished with papers and 3 lunch bags and their tennis shoes from last year, and it's just a disaster. They have to bring those proper folders, books, and materials home. They have to use time management to organize all the work they have to do to make sure that homework is done. And then I had to write hello on this one because this was the nightmare of my years of teaching, especially little kids, right? Because little kids, when I taught kindergarten, they'd forget to write their name. We even had a song that we'd sing. So it prompted the kids. They not only had to write their name, they had to write the date and the number of their cubby, because that's what we used to do. So we'd return their paperwork to their cubbies. And we had this little song, and my kids with ADHD or executive function, or who knows what it was, because they weren't diagnosed at that time, that song didn't work for them. No matter how many times we sang it, it took forever for them to get the system, but they did because we did the song every day. Now, the kids who would forget once in a while, that's executive function. That's something called working memory. So, you know, you see that less as kids get older because they've had so many years to write their work. But kids who forget to write their work and don't write their work again, even after so many times of being frustrated, I didn't write my work on my paper. My teacher didn't give me credit. She put it in the garbage can. She said she didn't get it. They don't always learn from the lesson. That's working memory. That's part of executive function. So those are things we're going to talk about. Getting started on a boring or difficult task is so much more difficult for these kids than I call them neurotypical kids. And people will say to me, Brenda, there's no normal. I'm like, you're right. There is no normal. But you can tell the neurotypical kids from the neurodiverse. Neurodiverse meaning they have disorders in their brain. Some of them are developmental lags, like executive function. It's a lag, and it will come with time if it's taught. So when I was a teacher, it was very clear which kids were neurotypical. Now, I didn't know that back when I was a teacher before I had kids. I learned that after I had kids and learned about ADHD and all those other disorders that my boys have. How about doing the homework and then putting it back in the folder, putting the folder back in the backpack, bringing the folder to class, and then remembering to turn it in? I mean, how many of you saw your child do the homework? You saw them put it in the folder and they don't turn it in. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. But the point is, that's executive function. It's a skill that needs to be practiced and supported. Punishment is not going to change that behavior. So nobody in the chat over there, I thought maybe you'd add something. Anybody add anything that I forgot about what you need for homework? It's okay if you didn't. This is your warm up to get involved in the discussion. Okay, so executive functions, this is a definition that I found. Executive functions are a set of cognitive processes that are necessary for the cognitive control of behavior. Behavior. This is why the children with executive function, ADHD, get in trouble so much, because it's the control of their behavior. So selecting and successfully monitoring, oh my goodness, that's like a tongue twister. Selecting and successfully monitoring behaviors that facilitate the attainment of the chosen goal. Well, that's everything we do all day long. Brushing our teeth, getting our backpack ready, eating breakfast. I mean, some kids, you have to tell them 30 times, you're going to take your vitamins before you eat your breakfast, or you got to take your vitamins after you have your breakfast before you get up from the table 30 times. Well, telling them isn't working because there's an executive function weakness. They don't remember routines. So there's things that you can do to work on that. And that could be a 5-hour lesson. And unfortunately, that's not something we're going to go over today. But I have an option for you at the end. So the first executive function that we're going to talk about is adaptable thinking. And again, if you think of something that I haven't written here that you think might be helpful to the group, put it in the chat and I'll share it if you're on the right track. Because let me tell you something. When I learned about executive function in 2004, by the way, in 2004, I learned about executive function. At that point, I had already taught for 10 years, had a master's degree in early childhood education, had someone, I won't say names, but someone in my life had ADHD, was getting in a lot of trouble at work. So I joined an organization called CHAD, Children and Adults with ADHD, to help them. And just to be upfront, I am a representative of CHAD in Oakland County. And I joined to help them because if I didn't have them, I always joke, I don't mean to be violent, but I always joke and say my kids would have no heads and I'd be in jail because they were so difficult to raise, partly because of their executive function weakness, partially because of their hyperactivity of ADHD, partially because lots of things. CHAD kept me from losing it more than probably the average parent because they taught me what to do. So adaptable thinking is one of the things you notice right away with these kids. If you change their structure, they do not do well with it. Black and white thinkers, very, very much. They think this way, they can't get out of their way of thinking. So when they get to something and they don't know what to do, they get stuck. They get stuck. And it also is when they can't see from someone else's perspective, they get stuck in their thinking. So a lot of time, this happens not in everyday hurdles or a difference in opinion, not all the time, but for the kids that are more rigid in their black and white thinking, then there's that issue. And then again, we all know that brain-based disorders like ADHD also come along with other disorders. 60% of kids with ADHD have something else, like anxiety or depression or something else. So dysgraphia. So that makes it even harder, especially if it's a mood-based disorder. We won't get into that. But if you have a child like that, you might see more rigid black and white thinking. So if a child gets in trouble while they're walking to school, okay, and something gets in their way, they don't think, what can I do? How can I change that? Maybe I should go down the street. I know this is an old example because most kids don't walk to school anymore, but it's like, remember when you walked to school, like if there was a problem or something, you'd figure out another way. If a child comes up to a roadblock in work, I always say they will bang their head against the wall and quit because they don't know how to go around, they don't know how to climb over, and they forget to ask for a ladder and ask for help to get to the other side. So one of the things I teach my kids is if you don't know how to do your work, you put on a timer. And you'll notice I have this little timer here. I have one that I'm watching the time to keep my time when I wanted to show you. Just so you know, we have 45 minutes left in case you're getting bored. I hope you're not. So what I say to my kids is if you don't know how to do your homework, then I want you to write a letter to your teacher and then put a reminder in your planner that says, you know, I don't know how to do this. I need extra help. Can I have the extra time? Because one of the things we do for kids with ADHD and executive function is give them extra time for the many reasons why they might fail in homework with that executive function and focus list. So on to the next slide. Can you think of anything that you see in your own children? When plans change, and my kids were little, especially my one with anxiety, he would lose it. You couldn't change the plan. If we were going to transition, I had to count it down every single time, because if I said, okay, it's time to do this instead of what you're doing, he would lose it because the transitioning was so difficult for him. He wasn't able to adapt easily. Oh, I see a chat room. What if the teacher's not, we're going to get through all of that. If you have questions, please save them for the end or put a Q in front of it so the moderators can write your questions down. How about that? Put a Q in front of your question. If the teacher's not receptive to the child, that is a whole discussion, and we will get to that at the end of this meeting. Okay, so from now on, just if you have, again, an issue I haven't brought up that might relate to your child in regards to planning, which is another executive function. Planning is the ability to think about the future, create a plan of actions, prioritize all the parts. That's a huge sign of cognitive development. Kids with these disorders have weak cognitive development in these areas. That's why when these kids go to get a neuropsychological test to get evaluated, they have these high numbers and then they have these low numbers. That is called the discrepancy. When I was a young teacher and I'd sit in special education meetings for my students and they'd be talking these words, and I was a new teacher. I didn't know what I was doing anyway. I was still figuring out my grade, let alone brain-based disorders. But I remember the word discrepancy back every meeting. There's a discrepancy, there's a discrepancy. It's usually not found with kids with ADHD and executive function. It's found more with kids with really low math, reading, or writing skills. But when you go to get a medical diagnosis, they will show you the discrepancy. And that's why all of us get so frustrated with our really bright kids, because our really bright kids have the ability, but they have those weak cognitive functions that we need to not punish, but build the skill, strengthen the skill. So some of them are making a list for packing for, like some people have a list that they print off their computer every year when they go on vacation, right? Some people pack at the last minute and then forget 10 things. Those are the people missing executive function strength because they do it every time and they forget every time. Why aren't they writing a list every time, right? Giving directions, to be able to give directions, it's hard for them to tell you what you need to do because they don't know how to organize their thoughts. So writing an essay is so difficult. And this is something we call chunking things down into smaller parts. So really good teachers do this all the time. They chunk it down. They go, first, I want you to pick a topic. And so our kids, sometimes with ADHD, they cannot come up with those specific ideas to write. It's a problem with a lot of my kids. So I say to the teacher, so you've got to give them a list of 10 things to write about, because then they'll pick one. Otherwise, that child will not do anything for 3 days. Now, luckily, that teacher will then say on the third day, okay, this was due on the third day. Now I want you to write 3 things that you're going to write about in your essay, 3 things you want to learn about. Well, they haven't even picked their topic, right? So it's like now that child is behind. So those are things that we can, and again, we won't have time to get through all those accommodations, but those are the kind of things you work on. And so you chunk it down. Good teachers do that. They say, pick your subject, have it due by Wednesday, write it in your planner. And then they put it on a sheet of paper. It's a document that shows the children, this is what's due when. Wednesday's the day we're going to decide what you want your body paragraphs to be. What are going to be your supporting paragraphs? And so on. Cleaning the room is a nightmare for these kids. If you are fighting with your kids who have executive function weakness or ADHD with executive function weakness, there is nothing more boring than cleaning a room. You should see my room right now. Seriously, some people just don't care if the room's clean. And this is what I say all the time. If you are one of those parents who's completely neat, and I mean a little bit obsessively neat, you're going to really, I always say, blow the lavender, if you know what I mean. Lavender for calming, like you're getting a massage, because these kids will stress you out. And you have to understand they can't help it. So you have to get over your thing of their bedroom being as neat as your bedroom, because that is a tough one for a lot of parents. Anybody with ideas about planning that they've seen with their kids? I don't see anybody, so we're going to go ahead. Okay, self-monitoring. And a lot of these things, by the way, could be related to each other. Like when I talk about one thing, it could be, they all kind of intertwine. So self-monitoring is the child's ability. Oh goodness, that's why I have my hot water. See, I'm prepared because I know I cough when I talk a lot. Okay. How well he or she is performing a specific task. So these kids rush through their work. They don't read the directions. They forget to write their name. It also helps, it helps you reflect on your progress, knowing what adjustments may need to be made. I mean, I have kids, they'll go on and on and on and on and on and on and on about one topic because they're excited about it, but it's a 3-paragraph essay and it's a maximum of 2 pages. So they're not breaking down the task to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not monitoring what's expected. Same thing with a child who does all the math problems wrong. I always say, you should always ask for the answers, or don't do a problem until you're sure of the answer if you don't understand, because you want someone to check you, because you don't want to practice it wrong. Well, these kids, they'll get them all wrong and they won't check why. Like I'll sit down with kids in our sessions and they'll do a problem wrong. I'll say, why do you think? I don't know. I said, why don't you go back and look at the example? We did. I go, no, we didn't. This is just the question. And they'll fight me on going back, and they'll do it each session. Finally, I'll say, okay, what am I going to tell you to do? We have to go back and look at the example. They forget that when I do something wrong, there's lots of good examples, but they get stuck and then they can't move forward. If you have any examples of this, self-monitoring. Am I studying enough for the test? No. These kids procrastinate till the last minute because it's boring. You got to self-monitor and sit yourself in a room where it's quiet and not allowed to be distracted. These kids, as much as they know they're distractible, they keep their phones right there. I say to them, turn your phone on airplane mode, turn it off. My mom's going to be mad. Let her know that you're turning your phone off. So it's like the same problem over and over again when we talk about it. So they're not self-monitoring. Oh, I'm so sorry. Working memory. This is another one. This is the one that as a parent or a teacher could make you lose your mind. You can tell the child the same thing 20 times. They don't remember it. So when I used to teach 2nd grade, I had a little boy. Every time we'd go in the hall, he'd run or scream. And I'd say to him, you can't run or scream, because you're in, I'd tell him why every day. And I'd have him come right behind me so I wouldn't make him feel bad. I'd say, what do we do in the hallway? Well, it got to the point where I just had to keep him with me all the time and make the reminder every time. And and then he got mad because he wanted to be in the back with his friends. And truthfully, he wanted to get in trouble. He was one of those little boys. When people say, oh, they're just being boys, sometimes they are. But no, when it's a true significant issue with working memory or ADHD, yes, they might be being boys, but they also do have reasons that their behavior, as we read in the definition of executive function, is affected by these things. So let's say every night after dinner, your kids are supposed to put the dishes away. And every night after dinner, your child gets up and forgets. That's the working memory. Sometimes they'll forget multi-step directions. Like if you say, go to your room, get your tennis shoes, and make sure to get your snowshoes too. They forget one thing. And my son, even until he was 17 or 18, and even now as an adult, he would look at me. It was really cute. If I give him too many directions, he'd be like, Mom. He'd remind me that I had to slow down. I was giving him too many steps. Or he'll even say to me, if you tell me something on the phone, I won't remember it. You have to text it to me because he won't remember it. He's 24 years old. He's still, boys with ADHD, their brain is immature, the boys their own age. So it's still developing. And for me to expect him to remember and get mad at him would be ridiculous. He has a diagnosis that affects working memory. Time management. Okay, this is the other one that I think drives most parents bonkers. The taking forever to get ready in the morning, the taking forever to go to the bathroom, the taking forever to get a shower, the taking forever to get started on the homework, the taking forever to get in the car, the taking forever to do anything. There truly is something called time blindness. You can look it up. They really don't have a sense of time. And one of the things I do with my students that I work with is I take this timer and I say, depending on the age, say you're going to sit down for 25 minutes and that's it. And then we go into a whole discussion about how to use the timer and then pay attention. Like you said, your work, because we always make a homework plan and we guess how long it's going to take us. And after a while, the kids start getting a better idea. No, those math worksheets don't take 45 minutes. They only take me 25. And I always feel like they take me 45. And so you want them to be aware of the time, because when you go to do something you don't want to do, if you think it takes longer than it does, you're going to really not want to do it. But if you say to yourself, it's only going to take 10 minutes, it's not that big a deal. Then it's that positive mental talk that you've got. You can do this. It only takes 10 minutes to write out those spelling sentences. So it's good to time them and also make the time appropriate for their age and their severity of their inattentiveness or hyperactivity. Remember, the kids who are hyperactive, they might need to get up and move. They will need to get up and move. And so do the kids who are inattentive, because they need to get up and move and help their brain. Movement helps the brain with all the executive function and focus. So, we got some people in the chat. The timer works like a chart. I know. I love it. I love it. I beg all my families to get one. She holds her fingers up as many times. My child will come back to me and say, I know there were 3 things, but I can only, so this person says, I hold my fingers up and my child will come back to me and say, I know there were these 3 things, but I can only remember these 2. What was the third? The visual of holding up the fingers. I love that. That is fabulous. You guys are so great. I love this. So fabulous. Yeah. And there's other things too. Yeah. Exercise is critical. These kids have to move. Oops.
I just wanted to interject for a second while you're getting on the right slide here. For anyone that missed the beginning of the session, you can put comments to what Brenda is presenting in the chat to engage a little bit throughout the presentation. And then if you have questions, she'll take those at the end. You can either unmute yourself or put them in the chat and one of us can read them.
Are you guys still seeing the screen?
We aren't anymore.
No. Okay, let me reshare it. Sorry, guys. I'm going to go back to the old fashioned way so I don't mess it up. See, this is what makes me nervous. Sorry.
You're okay. We're all used to these Zoom technology breaks.
Thank you. Okay, share screen. There we go. Can you see?
It's still flat. Oh, there it is.
I'm going to keep it the old way.
Okay.
Okay, organization. All I can say is executive function and ADHD can be related to organization. But I will tell you that a lot of these kids, because it's called a comorbidity, ADHD often comes with anxiety. And the kids with anxiety often are super organized to the point where it's like they could teach you something, right? So again, not all of these pieces of the executive function are going to define your child's issues. Make sense? Wait, I'm going to try to go back because I'm not going to be able to see you guys comment in there. Sorry. I'm going to go back to the original slideshow. Okay. Okay. So these kids, they have messy backpacks. You know what? I have my families have a backpack binder clean out depending on how messy the child is, once a week, twice a week, once a month, every other week, whatever, because it's a problem. And if the last thing we need is for them not to be able to find something, because that just gets them totally off focus of getting homework done. Okay. What can teachers do to support a child's executive function weakness? Well, this is again, this is from Understood, which is a CHAD article. And there's a list of things on there. They talk about something called mind mapping. This is also an article that you can check up. I'm going to go through some other things right now. So you can look these two up yourself, or just look up mind mapping, because everybody describes it a little differently, but it's a way of kind of breaking down ideas and writing them visually. And it chunks it all down. It's just like a Venn diagram or a diagram, and it's hard to explain. So look it up if you're interested. One thing they can do is a daily to-do list to track assignments. Like elementary school teachers that I adore, they have a checklist for the little kids. This is your list. I had a teacher who had they had like a laminated piece of paper that was thick, and they would write in their homework every day and take it home. And so she was training them to think about using a planner. I have some schools that as soon as they're in 3rd or 4th grade, they are making them use a planner, but I see schools dropping the planner off, and it drives me crazy. Now, that does not mean that you say your child doesn't need a planner. That's something that I expect all my kids to do. Like it's when they see that I say, well, find me a better option. And there's lots of different types of planners. Getting an extra set of books is so easy to do. If your child's forgetting the books, just get an extra set of books. When there's big projects or essays or anything that takes a lot of different steps, it should be chunked down. We call it chunking it down. There's different words for it, into smaller pieces with more deadlines and more check-ins. Another thing that's really helpful for these kids is a daily schedule. So really good kindergarten teachers and 1st grade teachers and 2nd grade teachers, and I taught those grades, one of the biggest things I had to do every day was put up my routine board. I had no idea when I was a brand new teacher. But when I learned about ADHD, I was like, this is why, because these kids need to know their structure. And these kids at this age might have some executive function weakness. They don't remember when they're in kindergarten what day they will go to the gym, what day they have reading time, what day they have study buddies. You know what I mean? So it's like, that routine is necessary. And as we get older, we take it away, which is sad, because not all kids have this executive function strengthened enough to know, oh, in chemistry every week we do labs on Tuesday, so bring this for lab. So that's another reason why you need the planner, because you can write all those things in there. A daily schedule is, I mean, you can ask a teacher, you can say, can you put up on the board what you're doing each day? Because it's not only going to help your child, it's going to help other kids. But the fact is, it's hard to ask the teacher to do all these things. And we're going to get into that in a minute. I'm an ex-teacher, 10 years in the classroom, public school, 2 years in private, and then the rest was back in public school. The amount of work these teachers have to do, I won't go back. Let's put it that way. I started this business because I knew I could help parents, but I also knew I didn't want to go back. And this was before the pandemic and Zoom teaching and all this. So the visual supports are huge, right? Like if kids forget, how do you multiply? Have a poster on the wall that shows you which way you multiply. Have a division rule up on the wall. I always said when I learned tennis, because by the way, I have horrible working memory. I used to say to my tennis teacher, if you would just put a poster up of how I'm supposed to hold my hands, I'd be so much better. But every week you tell me something different and I can't remember all the steps. By the way, my son has dyslexia. I always wondered what my issues were in school because I had such a hard time remembering information. I have horrible, horrible memory. And when I read, I don't always remember what I read. Dyslexia is genetic. You probably got it from me. Oh, here's someone in the chat. I'm in clutter. Minimizing clutter. That teacher should have a place for pencils. So if a child runs out of pencils, that's where you go to get it, because these kids lose their pencils all the time, right? They should have organization at their desk, that maybe their textbooks go on the bottom and their folders go on the top, you know, and a system to help the child, because there has to be systems and routines. That's how these kids learn. You can't just expect them to learn it after the first week of school. They need to go over and over again. Let's see what people wrote. The middle school counselor gave my ADHD kid one folder for homework. It is bright red and everything goes in the one folder. I like that. I like that a lot. I do that, and I do something else too. There's lots of ways you can do it. You just got to do it and do it consistently. And you have to be checking those folders every day, parents. When I hear parents with kids with ADHD, when I hear parents say I never have to check my kids' homework, first of all, I want to run away from them and scream because they don't really know they don't get true parenting. They haven't parented these kids. This is tough. This is tough. We don't get a break. We are checking every day. Now, as they get older, it gets better. But when the older we start working on these skills and getting proper supports in schools, the longer it's going to take to teach that old dog a new trick. I've also found the traditional daily planner is tough because they're only on that day. They almost need the monthly. I don't like a traditional daily. Well, it depends on the grade. It depends on the grade. I do a different thing for little kids, do a different thing for middle school, do a different thing for high school, do a different thing for college. As a matter of fact, the seniors that I work with, I give them the same plan that I do with my college kids. So the planners look very different because obviously the days are so different when you go to college. Thanks for your input over here. I appreciate it. Look, I learned how to do this. I get excited. Okay, so if you don't know what these terms are, they're really important for you to know if your child is struggling. When I was a teacher, I didn't know any of this. Even as I went into teaching further, and the second time I went to a school where kids were failing, there were teachers that didn't always know to bring these children to a group to discuss their issues. So what I always say to my parents is, if your child is struggling, but the school doesn't think they are, ask them to bring a list of your concerns to the group meeting, because they do have these group meetings to discuss kids who are struggling. But very often the parents who show up at meetings like you, the parents who go to Friends of Different Learner meetings, you guys are doing so much that I always say, sometimes you're a Band-Aid to the problem. And the problem digs deeper, and we need to get the help at school because you're doing work you shouldn't be doing. And the school should be doing things based on federal law. Federal law, and I'm not going to get into all that right now, but response to intervention is basically what all good teachers do. When good teachers see a problem, they will give a child some support. Let's say a child talks a lot. She might say, you know what, honey, I think I'm going to move you away from your friend because I know it's hard for you not to talk. You think that's a good idea? And they do it gently. And usually those kids understand because it's done in a gently, loving way. Now, we don't know if that kid who's talking is just a social butterfly or if they have nonstop, and there's a term for it. I looked it up because I always use the wrong term, but I have a few kids who talk on and on and on and on in my session, and I have to cut them off because we'll never get through anything. They just keep talking and talking and talking. I actually put it in the notes on my bottom of my lecture, but I can't see it. So if anybody knows what it is, we put it in the chat. Again, dyslexia, I can't remember words. So good teachers do response to intervention. If your child has ADHD and they say, well, we do this for all kids, but your child needs it. If they have ADHD, it should be written in a 504 plan. The 504 plan, most of the time, I'm going to start on the right. That's the less restrictive. Oh, someone left me a message. We have. Yeah. The college teachers do a better job. I agree with you. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what goes on at school and what your job is. No, college is easier for me to manage than high school, honestly. The professors post more. Again, I'm not bashing teachers. They have a job I don't want to go back to. It's hard. So anyway, a 504 plan is just supports. It supports to help the child. We call it leveling the playing field, right? So that if they have a hard time with executive function, we do these things to help them so they don't fail because they can't focus for too long, or they forget their binders, or they didn't pay attention when they were giving homework. So we don't want to punish them for that. We give them these extra accommodations. But sometimes it becomes a habit with these 504 plans, and I'll get to that. But most of the 504 plans don't change the weakness. You need to go to an IEP to change the weakness. So with a 504 plan, you're usually run by general education staff. Usually it is run by the school social work, the school psychologist, oh my goodness, I can't talk. The counselor when they get older. Elementary schools, it kind of bounces around. Some high schools, the vice principal does it, but that person is not with your child. You can have something called a check-in and a check-out system and ask that that be done if your child is not prepared with work. And there's a lot that goes into all of this. So I would like you to read articles about this because these might suit your child, but there might be more things that could be helpful. The major difference between the 504 plan and the IEP is that the child has someone who is in special education, or sometimes, like I wrote here, special services staff. I should have wrote that over here too. That there's like, if they have anxiety with their ADHD, or maybe they're acting out with their ADHD, they might be checking in with the social worker if they have social work support, or they might be checking in with the resource room teacher. They call whatever they call it, learning lab. They all call them different things, checking in, checking out. But what we want to make sure is that they have goals to strengthen their weaknesses. And when you have an IEP, you have goals, and then you get progress reports. It's typically every report card, period. But again, please look up. These are just a few. And I'm going to get moving fast because we are almost done. This is what you should be doing at home. Should. Routine structure, routine structure. You've heard it all your life of parenting. Keep a binder together starting today. If you've done any testing outside, put it in the binder. Any school standardized test scores, put it in the binder. Report cards, put them in the binder. If you have a child with an IEP, 504 plan, or currently is struggling and you're not getting the help you think you need, write up a history of all of this. What have been the struggles? Keep them in a binder. Because if you have a child with one of these disorders, you're going to need to keep advocating for them at school. So you might as well keep it all in one place. Because I used to meet with the teachers at least 3 times a year. And by the way, that's the next thing. I tell my parents, tell the teachers, you're not coming to parent-teacher conferences. It's 10 minutes. It's a waste of time. You are going to need that is a way for the teacher to get to know the family. If there's one little problem, they can mention it. Kids with these needs, they need more than 10 minutes, and you're going to need to be checking in more than once. So let the teacher know that at the beginning of the year and say to them, I need a conference, depending on your child's significance of their needs, how significant their disorder is. What you want to do is, if your child has severe behavior issues, you want to meet with the teachers. And again, behavior, that's executive function. We don't want them punished for this. We want to be proactive. Make sure the teacher knows about all this so they can set them up for success. Don't assume that those teachers, never assume that those teachers know you have an IEP of 504 or know of any response to intervention. I don't know about in Birmingham. They actually told me when I was there advocating that they do write it up. But some schools, like I said, well, where do you write that up if you have a response to intervention? Oh, we don't, because we offer that to everybody. I'm like, no, it needs to be documented. If this child goes to another school, if they move, you need to have that written down. What was working for your child? Make sure you read every syllabi, like you were saying, and someone else put in the chat. If the syllabi isn't adequate for you to understand to help your child, make an appointment with the teacher and find out what you need to know. Definitely don't miss open house, because you got to get the routines and the expectations down from the teacher. The planner I won't even discuss it. It just is not an option. You got to find the right one, but kids need it. When they're really, really little, maybe kindergarten, first grade, maybe not, but when they get to second and third grade, that daily sheet can be very helpful, and you got to get started. You as a parent, let's face it, this is a genetic disorder, okay? My kids got ADHD from their dad. They got anxiety from both sides of the family. I think Jared got dyslexia from me. So some of you have executive function weakness yourself. You're not keeping up with the weekly emails, monthly emails. Put a reminder in your phone that you got to check the online portals. I have a mom who has such severe anxiety and ADHD. She doesn't follow through with anything I tell her to do. Anything. And it's so frustrating to me. And I've told her, but you can only say so much to a parent. So I got the dad involved. He's doing much better. But you've got to find a way to make sure you're aware, because your child with these weaknesses won't be, probably. Always have a family calendar so you know what's going on. And then I say, put those things in their planner. Whatever is going to affect their time that day should be in their planner. If they're going to the doctor, if they have a baseball practice, put it in their planners. So when they're planning out their homework, they know, oh, you know what, I'm not going to be able to study Wednesday night. I forgot I have a baseball game, or Saturday, we have a wedding all day. I'm not going to have that day to do my homework. So I got to not count on it. Set up a homework plan, when you're going to start, what it will be completed, where to take breaks, show the completed work. Now, some kids don't need to show you their completed work. I will tell you the majority of my kids need to show their parents their completed work, because either it's not completed, they lost it and don't want to tell you. I mean, you probably have all been there. The time timer's here. Look up Pomodoro method. I love it. It explains how to use the time timer. This is what I say to all my parents. I don't know if you know what the word shtick means. Shtick means like, what's your stuff? What's your crap? What's in your head that keeps you from parenting your best? And I'm going to give you 2 examples for me. My mother, anxiety, right? A little OCD, everything had to be done just right, just perfect. Never let us do chores. I am like a 10-year-old. I don't want to do chores because no one ever made me do chores. It's not practical. So my shtick was, I have to get my kids doing chores. Well, the worst part was all the people around me didn't have their kids doing chores. And I was like, am I right? Am I wrong? I went in and I talked to a therapist about this. And my other shtick was, I was divorced and I didn't want the issues related to that to affect my kids. And when my kids would come home from their dad's house, because transition's so hard, they were a nightmare. And I had to deal with that. So that was my shtick, is dealing. I only have them half the week. And when I get them back, they're all over the place and they don't have their folder and they don't, and I had to deal with it. So I would say to parents, if you're not parenting the way you think you should be, get your own therapy. Raising these kids is hard. The other things, sleep issues must be addressed. Part of ADHD, you need to talk to the doctor. Limit sugar, increase protein. Everybody's dehydrated practically. These kids focus better when they have lots of water. Chad.org offers a thing called parent-to-parent training. It's amazing. They actually now do it for free. I just went online the other day. You used to have to pay. So I think I made it for us to have questions. If you would like to be notified of anything else I'm offering, and I am considering, because people have asked me forever, to have like a parent support group, and I'm considering doing that. So if you're interested, please email me and put friends. Make sure you put friends in the subject line. Otherwise, I mean, I'll see your random email, but it might go to spam. I don't know. Friends will just help me. So I have one more comment that was down here, and then we'll have time for questions. Yeah. Oh, good. Never does the parent. Yeah. Tell the teacher you're taking up on. And by the way, those teachers who are amazing to your kids, who work all these extra minutes, hours, days for them, presence, presence, presence. Now, I learned the law from a man named Peter Wright when I decided I wanted to advocate for kids. And that was one of the first things he said. By the way, Peter Wright is a much more mature gentleman, probably in his 70s. And he had dyslexia and ADHD. And now he is a special ed law attorney. Schools do not offer LD testing. They will test for numbers. Like, so if there's a lowness, they don't test for medical diagnoses. There is something called an IEE. If you do not agree with the testing that they do, we won't have time to get into that. But most people go pay for their own testing. It's very expensive. But if you don't agree with the test scores, you can request an IEE. I have never had a parent do that, but look it up if you're interested. Okay, so now we have time for questions.
Thank you, Brenda. If you guys want to put your questions either in the chat or you can unmute, I think we have the ability to allow that tonight. I think we had a couple questions that were in the chat earlier too. What if the teacher is not receptive to the child, and how are they trying to help themselves?
How are they trying to help them?
I'm not sure what that pertained to because this was earlier in the presentation, but I think the main question what if the teacher is not receptive to probably helping the child?
Well, if a child has a diagnosis, it is federal law that those accommodations need to be met. If a child does not have a diagnosis, you have the right to go to the school and say, I would like them tested. I'm concerned about why they're struggling. And then they need to take your input. That's why you want to have the history of everything. You want to write up the history and have it now, because it'll change over the years. You'll forget things that happened in the past, then they start happening again. It's like they didn't happen with the one teacher and now they're happening again. So you want to keep those records. You want to not contact one person. What I say is, if you have a teacher who's not receptive, you start emailing the teacher and one other person. Start right away. Matter of fact, I tell most of my parents that I work with, always email 2 people. Because if your child's struggling, what if the teacher's sick for 3 days and you're waiting to hear from them? So the other person can, not that I'm thinking every teacher doesn't want to do a good job, but listen, they miss an email or 2. I mean, if I had to deal with emails and the workday, and then I know how the teacher, I'd lose my mind. I would. So put another person on, but they cannot deny the accommodations in a 504 and IEP. Annotation and note-taking, that is something that is an accommodation. I don't know enough about your child, but it's a very good accommodation and it's offered in colleges like no problem. And honestly, now this is where I don't like to answer these questions, because not every kid needs them. We don't want to give a kid a support that they don't need. So when I first started advocating, it blew my mind that these kids didn't have copies of notes, even though it was written in their planner, and parents would just give up. They would completely give up. Now, if a school is not following an IEP, you have to go to the person above them. And if that doesn't work, then you file a complaint with the state, the special ed department, because that is the law that they have to file the accommodation. But don't go filing a complaint right away. I will tell you guys, if we ever meet again, remind me to tell you about the time that the teacher didn't know about my child's IEP. We won't have time. It was awful. Never assume they know. Okay, let me look at these questions.
Someone did make a comment about how you can call your insurance about testing. So if you want a full psychological exam, which will, go through learning disabilities, among other things, you can call your insurance. And some insurances will cover that. Some will cover a portion and some won't cover any. So that's a place to start. And it is quite expensive if they don't cover any. I think like a couple $1,000s.
It is really expensive. What blows my mind is that people get upset about it. I think, what would you pay if you had surgery? What would you pay? You're having you're doing a major evaluation with a doctor of psychology. If your child's struggling and you can't afford it, Easter seals will help you. I've had families go to Easter seals. So talk to the person at your school about Easter seals. Let me just keep reading. If they struggle with reading directions, a lot of times what teachers do is they'll stop at the child's desk and they'll specifically say, underline what you're supposed to do, circle what you're supposed to do. Really good teachers with little kids, they'll say, highlight what you're supposed to do. Get your highlighter out or underline what you're supposed to do. It just depends on the age. But if that's a problem, your teacher should be helping you. And again, don't rely only on the general ed teacher. They are trained in general education. They are not trained in these disorders. Now, when you have a teacher who's really fabulous, like you can't believe how lovely they are, they'll end up telling you eventually. I swear it happens all the time. I had a daughter with ADHD. Oh, we just got my son diagnosed with dyslexia. It's like those, you don't get it until you walk in our shoes. You don't get it. So you need to get someone who gets it. If the teacher doesn't get it, that's why you pull in someone else. But you got to pick your person, right? You might think that the principal at the school doesn't care. Maybe that's the feeling you've got. Then start pulling someone in who's related to the issue, the social worker, the reading consultant, the counselor. I don't know. Depends on the child. If a child is starting high school and they're resistant to having you look at their work, then they need to prove to you that they're doing it. You need to I always say, hold a set of standards in your family. Someone said, the kid who's going to high school doesn't want you to see the work. Well, as long as your grades are at this point, I will not be looking. That's what I always say, but make them reasonable. Not all kids can get all A's. Not all kids can get all B's. I couldn't get all A's and B's. I used to get a C because I had dyslexia and I couldn't memorize. So thank goodness they let me take Spanish pass fail, or I would have, you got to be realistic. There's an amazing app on the iPad that records the lecture, and you can take notes and play back the parts of the lecture tied to what notes you took. Your school, that is called assistive technology. You should be getting assistive technology supports through your school. You could ask to get an assistive technology, here I go, the word, assistive technology consult, to meet with you and discuss the issues you have. Because they should center it, do it for you. Parents shouldn't have to, like this one mom who wasn't getting anything, she was paying for everything. I said, don't you dare. But the school wasn't doing it. And in the end, honestly, the school was this was not your district. The school didn't do what they should be doing for a long time. The head of special ed got let go, and the head of special ed that came in had to pay for some mistakes. Now, I have parents who come to me and they're like, I need a lawyer. I'm like, you do not need a lawyer. I have never had a family come to me that needed a lawyer. I could always work it out with the school. You might not be able to. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we do not have a system that's perfect. The education system is far from perfect. So you need to know the law. You need to know what disorders are out there. You need to find the right people to care for your child's issues. And if someone says no, go to another one and keep going. I was told no a million times. My son, they were never going to let him in early on. Okay. I cried and begged to the person who worked there. All these kids in early on, they were severe, you guys. Do you know what early on is? Special ed preschool. They weren't going to let me bring him in. I went crazy. I said, you've got to let him in. He can't make it in regular preschool. The only other kid in that class who got her kid in was another teacher, because we both knew better. You got to fight and advocate for your kid, and you don't say no. Listen, I say to parents, maybe you're being unrealistic. Some parents are. Maybe you're getting all you should get. That's why it's a good idea to call an advocate, because 1 hour of time can either alleviate all your questions or help you bring up the right questions. This isn't easy. So thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm so honored. I wore my love shirt because Valentine's Day is coming. But here's the thing. It takes every ounce of love in you to have patience and understanding with your child. And I'm going to say this. Every time you expect something they can't do, every time you yell at them for making mistakes that they can't help, and that's the hard thing to tell the difference of, you are hurting their self-esteem. And you know what the number one symptom of any brain-based disorder is? Low self-esteem. Don't add to that hole that's already been dug, because these kids have it. That's my biggest goal as an academic coach, to help these kids love who they are. So I'm an advocate. Of course, you can reach out to me. I'm a friendly advocate. Yes. Well, thank you, everybody. You have a lot of wonderful teachers in Birmingham. I have a nice collaboration with a lot of them, but they know when I come in, we're going to be working. You're going to be hearing from me. So thank you
so much, Brenda.
Please don't forget, to email me with friends in the subject.
Yep. We will put this presentation on our website, and we'll put a link to it on our Facebook page. So if you missed any part of it and want to see it, you can look there. We will also put Brenda's contact information there if anyone wants to get a hold of her or check out her website. So thank you so much for your time tonight. A lot of information.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.